Good afternoon, everyone. I'd love to start by inviting us to take a holistic perspective on this challenge of educating everyone for the world. So I'm inviting us essentially to take a perspective which is the opposite of the perspective that got us into this Brexit situation. Damn, I wasn't going to mention Brexit. I just did mention Brexit. Educating children for the world. Let's zoom out from the world for a moment and think about what's the state of our world that we live in currently. Well, we live in a new world. A world of personal, societal, and environmental crisis. For too many people, this is a world which is still dominated by poverty, hunger, water shortages, inequity, exclusion, forced migration, slavery, unemployment, loneliness, depression, anger, violence, pollution, resource depletion, climate change, and species extinction. It does get more cheerful, by the way. This is also a world of deep volatility and complexity and uncertainty and ambiguity. This is the world in which, if we want to solve these problems, we need to step up and address this relentless, accelerating change. To survive in this world, organizations are having to reorganize and push decision-making to the edges in order that they can adapt and become shape-shifting organizations. And driven by artificial intelligence and automation, we are now in what many people call the fourth industrial revolution. Again, massive change in our working lives and in the economy. And also driven by technology to a large extent, particularly social media, but also by exploding human population and urbanization. We live in a world which is hyper-connected. We are bumping up against different people more than we ever have as a species. This is the world in which our children need to navigate and survive and thrive. And for me, it is thriving that is our deepest purpose and highest aspiration, or flourishing. And my belief is that if we want to thrive in this difficult world, we need to learn to thrive, and we need to learn to thrive together. Now, why is that word together so important? The assumption behind that word is that everyone and everything is wholly interconnected and interdependent. So every one of my actions shapes the world. Every one of your choices from moment to moment shapes the future. So to thrive in this world, we need to learn to act from moment to moment for our collective good. We need to learn to choose at every moment for positive change, or what we might call, we need to learn to live for universal well-being. Now, what does universal well-being mean? Again, sitting beneath this idea is this idea of interdependence. And universal well-being is this nested idea of personal well-being, which exists on many dimensions: physical, emotional, cognitive, relational or social, and spiritual. And that sits within societal well-being, which is the well-being of our communities, of our species. It's the well-being of our cultures and economic systems and political systems. And that sits within the well-being of our planet, as Satish says, living for the soil. So this idea of living for universal well-being is all about living from moment to moment to optimize my personal well-being, our collective well-being, and the well-being of the planet. Okay, this is a clue. What I'd like to do now is invite you to turn to the person on your right. Oh, hold on a minute, that doesn't work. It's an old joke, but it still amuses me. If you could turn to your neighbor and just ask the question, what does it mean to live for universal well-being? What does it mean to live for universal well-being? We'll take 2 minutes. Please, talk to your neighbor. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Now, who here has heard of CVR technology, crowd voice recognition technology? Okay, this is my first time using this, but we're going to play with this as an experiment. So after 3, what I'd like you to do is just to shout out key words that came up in your conversation. So you will shout on the count of 4. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, then shout, and we'll see if the technology picks this up. Okay, so keywords on the count of 4. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's see if the computer has picked it up. Oh, it's picked up quite a lot of your words. That's great. I think there are more. Lots of great words. Thank you for having such rich conversations. What we know is that this idea of living for universal well-being requires the development of a very broad range of knowledge, skills, and qualities of being. It's very interesting when we use this technology around the world, you get essentially the same answers coming back, and there's often a very strong emphasis on being words, being empathic, being self-aware, being creative, being resilient, etc. And we think then that in order to educate children for the world, we need to reframe what we're focused on in schools and beyond, where much of our emphasis is on knowing, and some of our emphasis is on doing, and not very much of our emphasis is on being. Now, when we think of, thank you, when we think of being, we need to also think of becoming. And in fact, perhaps we need to think of learning as being about becoming. And so education is about becoming empathic, becoming creative, so that everyone is always trying to become more empathic, to become more self-aware, etc. So this idea of being and becoming and learning, I think, is central to the idea of transforming education for everyone. Okay, now the question is, if we need to develop the whole human being to live for the whole world, how do we do that? What kinds of experience do we need to give to young people in order that they maximize their chances of becoming empowered holistically to live for the whole world? Well, we've used this technology around the world. I'm not going to use it again now. But what's interesting is you get the same answers coming up again around the world. When you ask people what kinds of learning experience are effective at helping people become equipped and inclined to live for the whole world, they say the same thing. It's about trusting young people, allowing them to take the lead. Now, as I go through this list, again, think about what the classic schooling experience is for young people. It's not like this. It's about getting young people out into the community, out into nature, doing projects, exploring, experimenting, being challenged, failing, and celebrating failing. It's about questioning. It's not about doing what you're told. Living for universal well-being isn't about following the rules or the old ways of doing things. We need to be questioning and debating, reflecting, playing, moving, meditating, making. These are the kinds of learning experience that every young person needs to have throughout their childhood and throughout their adulthood, from the ages of -9 months. So who is it who influences these experiences? Who do we need to convince in order to provide this kind of empowering learning experience? Again, if you ask people around the world, they'll tend to come up with the same influences. There are people who have a very direct influence on the experience of young people, and therefore on the empowerment of young people. Parents, families, teachers, and out-of-school educators, peers, social workers, health workers, religious leaders in many places, and the other kind of religious leader, the advertisers in most countries. These are people who are having a very profound influence on the experience of young people and are helping or hindering their holistic development. Now, when you ask further, who else influences, people will also identify a group of second-line actors, people who have an indirect influence, but often a very profound influence. These are the policymakers, the teacher training institutions, the unions, university admissions people, funders, etc. How many of these people at the front or second line are thinking about and actually doing something about empowering whole human beings to live for the whole world? Very few in most places, but there are always some in every place. There are amazing people doing amazing work everywhere. The problem is they're mostly competing with each other. They're competing for funding, and they're competing for voice or awareness or recognition. So the existing system is pushing people to fragment themselves into little camps that don't talk to each other and don't collaborate. So there's a really important role for us in every place, in every neighborhood, in every city, in every country, to stand up and find each other as change leaders or change makers, and to find a way of aligning ourselves to this shared purpose. That means aligning ourselves to a shared future, aligning ourselves often to a shared history, and aligning ourselves to shared values in the present moment, so that we can move together in a sympathetic way towards our shared future. But being aligned is not enough. We could all be aligned in this room to a shared purpose, but we might never talk with each other. We might never share resources or processes or learnings or opportunities. So the next thing we've got to do, once we're aligned, is actually go beyond sharing purpose to sharing processes, opportunities, resources. We need to collaborate. We need to form teams, and we need to connect those teams into teams of teams. Now, we could be aligned, we could be collaborating, but we might still only be scratching the surface of the problem. Mathieu was mentioning this in the previous session. We need to act systemically. So when we're collaborating, we need to think about how can we create enduring, long-term, deep systemic change. And that means changing systemic mechanisms like policies and curricula, but it also requires us to change mindsets widely and deeply, because it's our mindsets that create the behaviors that animate every system. This process then of aligning change leaders to a shared purpose, of fostering collaborations, and of acting systemically together for long-term transformation of education systems so that every young person can become wholly empowered to live for the whole world is a process we call weaving. Weaving is a leadership style, it's a practice, and it's a profession. And I would invite you all to explore this as an approach to creating systemic change wherever you are and at whatever scale you're working. Thank you very much.